In today's video, we'll be looking into the story of Andrei Chikatilo, also known as the Butcher of Rostov. Andrei Chikatilo's gruesome killing spree shook the Soviet Union and reminds us of the case of Jeffrey Dahmer. Chikatilo, as well as Dahmer, had an evil mind, and both men struggled with impotence. This, in combination with a desire for control, resulted in ultimate bloodshed. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in the Ukrainian SSR during the Holodomor, which translates to death by hunger, and was caused by Joseph Stalin's brutal Soviet regime. Together with his family, he barely survived in a tiny one-room cottage. Chikatilo's mind was shaped by his childhood of starvation and constant fear. In his teens, Chikatilo was a model student, but outside the classroom, he didn't seem to fit in. He was very awkward in social situations, especially around girls, and he had a secret. He was impotent. These two factors led to his developing sense of feeling inferior to his classmates, and his mental instability only grew stronger. Despite these obstacles, Chikatilo was able to find a wife, get married, and have 2 children. He had several jobs, and once even worked as a teacher. However, beneath his facade of normalcy, darkness lurked. It was on December 22, 1978, that his darkness finally took over. Not long before, Chikatilo had secretly bought an old and rundown house in a small town near Rostov-on-Don. There he lured his first victim, 9-year-old Yelena Zakotnova, inside. Once inside the house, he overpowered her, but when he tried to rape the little girl, he was unable to get an erection. While they struggled, Yelena tried to escape, but Chikatilo managed to grab her, suffocate her, and stab her in the abdomen. During their struggle, Chikatilo got aroused, and to his own surprise, he ejaculated. It was then that he realized he was able to get an orgasm from brutal force. To prevent Yelena from telling anyone about his crime, he strangled her and threw her body into the nearby Grushevka River. After the murder, Chikatilo tried to resist his urges and was able to keep up the facade for a couple of years. But eventually, his cravings took over again. On September 3, 1981, 17-year-old Larissa Tkachenko was waiting for a bus home to her boarding school when Chikatilo approached her. He lured the young girl to a nearby woodland by promising her some alcohol. As soon as they were out of sight, Chikatilo threw Larissa to the ground and tried to rape her. But again, he couldn't get an erection. Frustrated, he stuffed her mouth with soil and leaves to prevent her from screaming. He then continued to beat her and eventually strangled her to death. Without a knife at hand, he carved her flesh with his teeth and a stick. His intense rage even drove him to bite off one of her nipples and eat it, showing the first signs of cannibalism. 9 months later, on June 12, 1980, 13-year-old Lyubov Biryuk was walking home from the bus stop when she met Chikatilo. He followed her to a quiet area and dragged her into the bushes. There, he tore off her clothing, stabbed her and slashed her to death. From this moment on, Chikatilo spiraled out of control. He no longer attempted to resist his urge to kill, and he developed a pattern that became chillingly familiar. He preyed on the vulnerable, runaways, orphans and prostitutes, people he considered less likely to be missed. According to his testimony, he would then overpower them with his 200-pound frame and unleash all his built-up rage. 5 more victims, including his first male victim, were killed within 3 months. He abducted young girls and boys from bus or train stations and killed them in a remote place. He brutally stabbed, disemboweled, strangled, and ravaged his victims. One victim's body was so mutilated that investigators felt it had been harvested. At times, Chikatilo even ate the genitalia of his victims and removed their noses and tongues. He later stated that he would cut out the victims' eyeballs because they kept an imprint of his face even after death. For years, the Soviet authorities ignored Chikatilo's reign of terror, refusing to accept that such evil could exist in the communist state. Meanwhile, Chikatilo was a true chameleon, ordinary in appearance and able to blend into society while committing crimes that were too hard to comprehend. The investigation into the murders was chaotic and slowed down by bureaucratic red tape. But most frustrating of all was the police's refusal to accept the evidence. Many men were wrongfully convicted and in some cases, even executed. But eventually, at the end of the 1980s, the net began to close around Chikatilo. A special task force, led by the detective Viktor Burakov, built a case against him, and in the fall of 1990, the Butcher of Rostov was finally caught. The trial was a total media sensation, and although he was charged with 53 murders, Chikatilo confessed to killing 56 people during a 12-year period. Andrei Chikatilo was executed in 1994, and his body was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison grounds. Until today, Andrei Chikatilo is considered one of the most notorious serial killers in Soviet history. His story, as well as that of Jeffrey Dahmer, is a cautionary tale and a cruel reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to strike.